There were three foundational lessons that I learned very early on in my journey to having more financial freedom and choice that took me from feeling trapped in a career I hated to having the freedom to walk away from it. And they are from the famous book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And this was the first book that I read in the whole finance and self development space. And it completely rewired how I think about money and how I used my money from that point on. And I still use the lessons that I learned from this book in how I make decisions with my money today. So in this video, I'm going to talk through each of those lessons one by one and how you can apply them to making money related decisions, whether that's the decision to buy a house or whether you should upgrade your car or not. My name's Pav, and I'm a chartered accountant that spent 12 years working in finance in London before leaving that career about 12 months ago and taking a 30% pay cut to do a job I enjoy instead. And on this page, I'll be sharing my journey as well as actionable tips on how you can build a life that gives you more financial freedom and the choice to do more of what you enjoy. Let's get into it. The first lesson was understanding the difference between an asset and a liability. So in the book, Robert explains that an asset is something that puts money into your pocket, in other words, gives you an income, whereas a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket, or in other words, increases your expenses. Now, this was really eye-opening for me because I'd grown up thinking, like a lot of us do, that owning the house that you live in is an asset. But when I read the book, I realized it was actually the opposite. Because when you buy a house to live in, it doesn't increase your income. And in fact, the opposite happens. It increases your expenses because you now have a mortgage and other household expenses to pay. And that actually takes money out of your pocket, so it can't be an asset. And at the time of reading the book, I was actually in the process of buying my own place because that's what I thought being successful meant, that I had to actually own the place I lived in. And I'd actually reserved an apartment at a development nearby. But when I read the book, I realized that buying that apartment wasn't going to move me closer to my goal of wanting more freedom and choice. And in fact, it was going to do the opposite because it was going to increase my essential living costs, which was going to give me less freedom. And so I actually made the decision to no longer go ahead with it. And I think a lot of us have been conditioned to believe that buying a house is the ultimate sign of success, and therefore we don't really take the time to weigh up whether that is the right decision for us and what it might mean for our freedom, or is there an alternative that might be better? And that's where lesson number 2 comes in. And that is that being wealthy isn't actually about how much money you earn, whether that's through a business or being an employee working for somebody else. It's how you use the money you earn. And in the book, Robert describes 3 money patterns. 2 of these keep you poor, but one of them actually helps you generate wealth. The first pattern is that all your income goes directly on expenses. So this is where you simply spend all the money that you earn every month and you have very little or nothing left at the end of the month. So this could be on your essential items like your groceries, bills, travel to work, or those nice to have items like buying a new handbag, the new iPhone, eating out, ordering in takeaways, or going to the cinema, things like that. The second pattern is that your income goes on buying liabilities, and those liabilities then generate expenses, which force you to spend your income. So an example of this would be buying a car on finance, where you then have to make monthly payments to keep hold of the car. Or just like in lesson number 1, where you buy a house and you now have to make mortgage payments and have other household expenses to run the house. And this has the same impact as pattern number 1, where you are forced to spend your income. And that is why these 2 patterns keep you poor, because they stop you generating wealth. The third pattern, however, is where you use your income to buy assets. And those assets then generate you an income or cash flow, which you then use for your expenses. So an example of this could be buying a house. But instead of living in the house, you rent it out, and that property then generates you an income, and that rental income is what you then use for your expenses. For example, your car payments. Or another example could be investing in yourself, learning how to create a digital product. That digital product then becomes your asset and generates you an income, which you can then also use for your expenses. And at the time I read the book, I'd had my car for about 5 years and I was getting a bit bored and I was thinking about changing it. But when I learned about pattern number 3, I decided not to do that, and I kept my car and I've still got it, and I've had it about 10 years now. So acquiring assets and not liabilities is the goal, but you might be thinking, well, how do I save the money to buy those assets? And that is where lesson number 3 comes in, which is all about avoiding lifestyle inflation, which is the idea that as you earn more, you also start to spend more, which means you aren't left with any more at the end of the month. For example, you get a promotion or you switch jobs and your take-home pay goes up by $500 a month. And in response, you decide to move into a bigger apartment, upgrade your car, start eating out more, and before you know it, your entire pay rise has been wiped out. And all of a sudden, you've got extra liabilities and higher expenses, which means you aren't left with any more at the end of the month compared to before you had the pay increase. And when I read this, it was a big aha moment for me. And I decided from that point on, any pay increase that I got, instead of using it to buy more clothes or eat out more and essentially fund my lifestyle, instead, I decided I was going to use that money to buy income generating assets that would help me replace my income. I also made it a rule that I wouldn't rely on any bonuses I received, and any amount I did receive as a bonus would all be invested into buying more income generating assets. Which is why when it came to me leaving my career in finance and taking a 30% pay cut and walking away from a £34,000 bonus as well, I had the freedom and the choice to do it. So to summarize, those three lessons are that an asset is something that increases your income, whereas a liability is something that increases your expenses. If you want to generate wealth, then use your income to acquire income generating assets and use that income to fund your liabilities and your expenses. And number three, avoid lifestyle inflation. So as your pay increases, upgrade your asset base and your investments rather than your lifestyle. And it's been 5 years since I read the book, and I still use those three lessons today as a guide to help me make decisions with my money. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, then please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.